come back for the open bar or the chicken or fish. I came back because my mother decided, in front of 200 people under a tent strung with twinkle lights, that the safest thing she could do was put me in my place one more time. "Well, look who found a babysitter for her spreadsheets," she said, loud enough to carry, a flute of champagne tilting in her hand. "I'm honestly surprised they let someone who counts other people's pennies take a whole weekend off." A few people laughed the way you laugh at a host you don't want to offend. My father studied the bottom of his glass like there was a map in it. My sister, halfway out of a hug with some cousin, went stiff in her wedding dress. And the groom, her groom, the man I'd never been introduced to because nobody in my family thought I needed to be, turned the color of the tablecloth. He set his drink down too hard. He didn't look at my mother. He looked at me, and his mouth opened, and what came out was half a sentence, strangled. "Stop. Do you have any idea who you're?" He didn't finish. He couldn't. But you can't understand why a grown man almost dropped a glass at his own wedding until you understand what my family took from me, a long time before that, at a kitchen table that always smelled like burnt coffee and pine sol. I was 17 the spring I got into nursing school, and 18 the fall. I learned that in our house, the word independence was something you handed to the kid you'd already decided not to spend money on. We lived in a split level outside Dayton, the kind with shag carpet on the stairs, and a finished basement my father called his office, though all he ever did down there was watch the news and avoid us. I spread everything out on the kitchen table the way the financial aid office told me to: acceptance letter, the aid award, the gap, the part scholarships and federal loans didn't cover. I'd practice what I was going to say in the car. I kept it short. "I got in," I said. "But there's a gap. I need help with the first year, and after that, I think I can work enough to carry it." My mother was slicing an apple into a Tupperware for my sister's lunch the next day. She didn't put the knife down. "You'll find a way," she said. "That's what growing up is, figuring it out." I looked at my father. He had the newspaper folded into a little square, the way he did when he wanted to look occupied. "Your mom's not wrong," he said, and turned the square over. That was it. Nobody. Let's sit down and look at the numbers. No, what if we co-sign? No, let's call your grandmother. Just a sentence that landed like a door closing, soft, final, deniable. They didn't say I wasn't worth it. They didn't have to. They just declined to pay, the way you decline a warranty. 3 weeks later, my sister's friends started talking about prom, and within a month there was a barely used Civic in the driveway with a bow that my father had clearly been embarrassed to buy, but bought anyway. My sister was 16. She cried the right amount. My mother handed her the keys on the front step like it was a coronation. "You work hard," my mother told her, which was a thing I had also done, every day of high school for the both of them. I didn't say anything. I'd learned that saying things only gave my mother a reason to explain why I was wrong to feel them. So I tried it their way. I deferred a semester. I tipped the early shift at a Kroger on Far Hills and the closing shift at a diner on weekends, and I lived on the dented cans from the discount card. And I enrolled at the community college because it was cheaper and the credits would transfer. I did the math on a legal pad every Sunday night until I knew it in my sleep. I was going to make it. Slower than my friends, but I was going to make it. Then the fast came back wrong. Here's the thing they don't warn you about. Your financial aid is built on what your parents put on a form, and if that form says the wrong thing, the whole house comes down. My award got slashed because, on paper, my parents reported they were already contributing to my education. They weren't. But the federal system believed the paper, not me, and suddenly the gap I'd been killing myself to cover doubled. I had about 4 weeks to come up with money I did not have. So I went back to the kitchen table. One more time. My mother didn't even let me get the second sentence out. "No," she said. "If we bail you out every time, you'll never learn to stand on your own." "You're paying for her," I said. I didn't raise my voice. I'd stopped raising my voice in that house years before. Sister's tuition, her car, her phone. My father did his thing where he tried to sound reasonable. "We can't put 2 kids through college at once. It's just not feasible." "You're not putting 1 kid through college," I said. "You're putting her through." "I'm putting myself through." My mother's jaw did the thing it did. "She's different," she said. "She actually has a future to invest in." I want to be honest about what happened in me when she said that. It wasn't a sob. It was the opposite. Something in my chest went still and cold and very, very clear. The way a room goes quiet right after a glass breaks. I understood in that one sentence the entire architecture of my childhood. They didn't love me less when I asked for things. They loved me only when I asked for nothing. The minute I needed them, I became a line item they wanted to delete. I drove back to my apartment that night, and I didn't cry there either. I sat on the floor with the legal pad and I did the math one final time, and the math said no. So in the morning, I withdrew. I filled out the forms, watched my account go gray, and felt something I hadn't expected, which was relief, like unhooking a weight you've carried so long you forgot it wasn't part of your body. My mother watched me carry boxes to my car a few weeks later, when I gave up the lease near campus and moved to a cheaper place across town. "So you're just quitting," she said from the porch, arms crossed. "I'm building something that doesn't run on your moods," I said, and I shut the trunk. My father came out rubbing the bridge of his nose like I was a headache he'd swallow an Advil for and forget. "You don't have to make this so dramatic," he said. "What's the part that's dramatic?" I asked. "The part where I leave, or the part where you let me?" He didn't answer. His silence had always been his real position. I drove off and I didn't look in the rear view, and that was the last time I lived in that house. People want this to be the part where I joined the army or ran off and reinvented myself in a montage. It wasn't like that. It was slow and ugly and boring. I kept the grocery job. I took 2 classes a semester at the community college, then 3, and I picked accounting because numbers don't change their story depending on which kid you love best. A ledger is a ledger. It either balances or it doesn't, and no amount of charm from my mother could make a column add up wrong. I found that almost unbearably comforting. There was a professor named Quinn who taught the auditing sequence, a dry, exact woman who never once told me I had potential, which was the most respectful thing anyone had ever done for me. One afternoon, she kept me after class and slid a flyer across the desk for a paid internship at a regional firm. "You notice things other people are too polite to notice," she said. "That's a skill or a curse depending on where you point it. Point it at this." I took the flyer. I got the internship. I was 23 and I had finally found a world that paid me to look directly at the thing everyone else was pretending not to see. I got my degree at night while I worked days. I sat for the CPA exam in pieces, one section at a time, in a testing center that smelled like printer toner and other people's stress. I passed the last part the week I turned 26. I didn't tell my family. There was no one to tell who would have meant it. Forensic accounting found me the way water finds the low spot. I was good at the dull, surgical work of following money through the places people hoped it would disappear: shell entities, doctored invoices, the soft little lies that look like clerical errors until you stack enough of them. I moved from the firm to the state, into the enforcement division of the agency that licenses and polices financial professionals. It is not glamorous. There are no car chases. It is a gray office and a lot of subpoenaed bank records and a kind of patience most people don't have. But I will tell you what it is. It is power. The quiet kind. The kind that sits in a recommendation memo and decides whether a man keeps his career or spends 2 years explaining himself to people like me. My supervisor was a woman named Lena Castillo, who had been doing this for 20 years and had a sign on her desk that just said, "Righty, I-T, down." On my first week, she told me, "We don't get angry in this job. Anger makes you sloppy and sloppy gets cases thrown out. We get accurate. Accurate is the only thing they can't appeal." I wrote it down. My parents came back into my life the way they always had, when the account ran low. The first call came when I was 28, 3 years after I'd left for good. My mother's voice was warm as a Sunday, like we'd talked the week before. "We are so proud of you," she said, which was funny because she didn't know what I did for a living. I waited. There's an art to waiting. And then it came. My sister had transferred to a private school, the financial aid hadn't come through, and they were just a little short. "We're family," my mother said. "Family helps." "I can't help with that," I said. "Oh, don't be like this. After everything we did for you." I almost laughed. I didn't. Accurate, not angry. "Take care," I said, and hung up, and felt the old familiar nothing. There's a particular emptiness in confirming that the people who made you have not changed at all, that the distance you traveled was entirely yours. By the time I was 31, I'd been promoted to lead investigator, which meant cases came across my desk before anyone decided whether to open a full enforcement action. I was the gate. A name would land in my inbox, and I would pull the threads and decide whether the threads led anywhere, and my recommendation would set the whole machine moving or let the man sleep easy. Lena used to say it like a warning, "You're not a referee out here. You're the weather. You don't argue with weather. It just arrives." I found out my sister was getting married the way I found out everything about my family by then, through the internet, sideways. A photo, tagged by a cousin, my sister on a beach, a ring, a caption with too many exclamation points. And there, with his arm around her, a man I almost scrolled past. Garrett Vance. I knew the name before I knew the face, because the name had been sitting in a folder on my desk for 6 weeks. Vance was a partner at a wealth advisory shop that had popped up on our radar after 3 different clients filed complaints that didn't, on their own, mean much, but stacked up, the way the small eyes do. Misrepresented fees. Money moved between accounts in a pattern that looked an awful lot like a man borrowing from clients to cover a bad quarter and hoping the next quarter saved him. I hadn't recommended a full action yet. I was still pulling threads. His license, his livelihood, the entire future he was building with my sister. All of it was sitting unfinished in my drawer. I stared at that photo for a long time. Then I did the only correct thing. The next morning, I walked into Lena's office and told her I had a personal conflict on the Vance matter, that the subject was about to become family, and that I needed to be walled off from the case completely. She didn't ask a single question except, "When did you find out?" "Last night." "Write it down," she said, and started the recusal paperwork herself. By the end of the week, I was formally separated from anything with his name on it. I had no part in what happened to Garrett Vance. I want that on the record, because everything that came later, people tried to make it my doing, and it wasn't. I'd already taken my hands off the wheel before I ever set foot at that wedding. The invitation came addressed in my sister's handwriting, which surprised me. Inside was a note, "Mom doesn't know I'm sending this. I'd really like you there." I sat with it on my counter for 2 days. In the end, I went because I wanted to look my family in the eye as the person I'd actually become, instead of the failure they'd written into the family story. That's all? I swear that's all I went for. I wore a charcoal suit, tailored, the kind you earn one paycheck at a time and then keep forever. I didn't wear it to make a point. I wore it because it was mine and I paid for it and nobody had handed it to me. I drove out to a vineyard venue an hour past the suburbs, all string lights and rented elegance, and I parked my own car and walked in alone. My sister saw me first. For a second, her face did something complicated. Surprise, then a flash of something that might have been hope. Then the careful arrangement back into bride. She came over and hugged me, and it was real. I'll give her that. "You came," she whispered. "I didn't think you would." "You asked," I said. Then my mother found me, and the warmth in the air dropped 10 degrees. She looked me up and down, taking in the suit, the calm, the absence of whatever wreckage she'd hoped to find on me. And because she could not stand a version of me she hadn't authored, she reached for the oldest tool she had, in front of everyone, and made the comment about counting other people's pennies. That's when Garrett, who had been crossing the lawn toward his bride with 2 glasses, stopped dead and went white. I watched him place me. I watched his eyes drop to the conference badge that wasn't there, and find me anyway, the way you recognize a smell from childhood before you can name it. He knew my face from somewhere official, a hearing he'd sat in the back of, a photo on the agency directory. He couldn't place exactly where, but his body placed it before his brain did, and his body said, "This is a person who can end you." "Stop," he said again. Lower this time. "We should not be doing this here." My mother laughed, delighted to have an audience. "Garrett, honey, ignore her. That's just my older daughter. She does some kind of office job for the state." I watched him hear older daughter. I watched the math finish in his head. The blood didn't come back to his face. "Maybe," I said quietly to him, only to him, "we should step inside." He nodded before he knew he was nodding. We ended up in a side room off the main hall, the kind of room venues keep for exactly this, for the conversations that can't happen in front of the cake. My sister followed, confused, her veil catching on the doorframe. And of course, my parents came too, because my mother could not allow a room to exist that she wasn't running. Garrett spoke first, and to his credit, he spoke to me like a professional, not like a man in a tuxedo. I didn't know you were related to her. I swear I didn't make the connection until just now. I know, I said. If I'd known. He stopped. His throat worked. It wouldn't have changed how I behave professionally. I need you to know that. Professionally? My sister said, the words small and frightened. What does that mean, professionally? You two know each other? He looked at her, then at me, and the conflict on his face was almost hard to watch. A man caught between the woman he was marrying and the woman who held a folder with his name on it. Your sister, he said carefully, works in enforcement. For the state. My firm is. There's an inquiry. The room went silent in a particular way I've come to recognize. Shock has a weight to it. It pushes people down into themselves before they can react. My mother got there first, because she always did. An inquiry. She repeated, like the word was beneath her. Into what? And what does she have to do with it? Nothing, Garrett said, and I almost respected him for it. She has nothing to do with it. As of last week, she removed herself. He turned to me, and there was something close to gratitude in it, and something closer to terror. You recused yourself. The day after I saw the engagement photo, I said. I notified my supervisor, and I was walled off. I haven't touched anything with your name on it since. My sister's eyes were filling. You knew, she said. You knew before you came tonight, and you didn't say anything. It wasn't mine to say, I said. Your fiancé's business is between him and the people still on that case. Not me. Not at your wedding. My mother's voice climbed. Oh, that's rich. You walk in here in your little suit, you let everybody think you're some big important somebody, and now you're going to play the saint. I didn't answer her. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and I watched my father flinch, an old automatic flinch, the body remembering 100 small braces for impact. But all I took out was an envelope, and I set it on the table between us, gently, the way you set down something you've been carrying a long time. My sister looked at it like it might be live. What is that? My mother said. My student loan history, I said, and a few other documents. I pulled them years ago. I'm a forensic accountant. We pull our own records the way doctors check their own moles. My father had gone very still. Ancient history, my mother said, but her voice had lost some of its floor. Not really, I said. Some of it's still active. I slid the first page out. There's a Parrot Plus loan here, taken out the same fall I was supposedly figuring it out on my own. And a private loan, co-signed. I looked at my father. The co-signature is mine. The thing is, I never signed it. You don't know what my mother started. I pulled the second page free, and my father leaned in, and the color drained out of him all at once, the same way it had drained out of Garrett on the lawn. Because he recognized the form, it was a financial aid certification, dated 9 years back, signed in his hand, attesting that my parents were contributing to my education. The exact statement that had blown my federal aid out of the water and put my tuition out of reach. The statement that had been a lie the whole time. And here, I said, sliding out the third page, my voice as level as I could make it, is the account history for the college fund my grandmother opened in my name when I was 4. The one you were custodian of, the one you told me at that kitchen table, didn't exist. The withdrawals were all there. Where the money went was all there. It had gone to a private school, a car, a deposit on a venue not unlike this one. No, my father breathed. My sister had stopped crying. She'd gone past crying into something worse, a kind of frozen comprehension. What is she saying? She whispered. Mom, what is she saying? It was Garrett who said it, because Garrett did this for a living and couldn't help himself. He looked at the pages, and his voice came out flat and clinical and devastated. She's saying they certified financial support they weren't providing to redirect federal aid, and they liquidated a custodial account that legally belonged to her and signed her name to a loan she didn't authorize. He swallowed. Any one of those by itself is a problem. Together, he stopped. He looked at my parents the way I'd seen him glance at his own folder in my imagination. Together, that's not a misunderstanding. That's fraud. That could be identity theft. The word landed in the room and just sat there. My mother recovered the way she always recovered, by going on offense. This is unbelievable. You disappear for 9 years. You show up in a suit like you're somebody, and you ruin your sister's wedding to settle a score. I'm not settling a score, I said. Nobody's getting prosecuted tonight. I didn't bring these to hand to a judge. I brought them because I am so tired of being the family liar. I looked at her, and for the first time in my life, I watched her look away from me first. You told everyone I quit, that I was lazy, that I gave up. And the truth is, you took my college fund. You forged my name. You starved my financial aid. And then you called me a quitter to cover the smell. I'm not rewriting the past. I'm just refusing to keep carrying your version of it. We did what we had to do, my mother said. And there it was. No denial. No apology. Just the justification, the same one she'd used over the apple at the kitchen table, the same one she'd used my whole life. We did what we had to do. My sister made a sound I'd never heard her make. What you had to do, she repeated. You stole from her. For me? She looked down at her own dress, at the whole expensive day, and I think for the first time she saw the price tag on her childhood, and whose name was on it. Brooke, I said, and it was the first time I'd said her name out loud in years. You were 16. You didn't take anything. They gave it to you and told you it was love. That's not your fault. It's not enough, she said, shaking her head. Knowing it's not my fault. It's not enough. No, I agreed. It's not, but it's the truth, and you can decide what to do with it. That part's yours now. Garrett had sat down in one of the venue's stiff little chairs, holding his own face. I need to postpone, he said, to no one, to all of us. We can't stand up in front of everyone in 20 minutes like none of this happened. That's reasonable, I said. My father hadn't spoken since the second page. When he finally did, his voice was wrecked. Why didn't you ever tell us you knew? I looked at him for a long moment. Would you have listened? Or would you have spent the next 9 years explaining to me why I was wrong to be upset? He didn't answer. His silence answered, the way it always had, except this time he seemed to hear it himself. I picked the envelope back up. I didn't leave the pages on the table. They weren't a threat. They were just true, and true things don't need to be left lying around to do their work. At the door I stopped and looked at Garrett, who looked like a man who dodged something he couldn't even see the shape of yet. For what it's worth, I said, I really did take my hands off your case. Whatever happens to your firm, it won't be me. You should fix what needs fixing, while you still can choose to. He nodded, and then he said low, I'm sorry, for the penny thing, for all of it. You didn't know, I said. You still didn't deserve it, he said. I thought about that. No, I said, but I survived it. That's a different kind of even. And I walked back out into the reception, where the band was still playing for people who had no idea the floor had just gone out from under the family hosting them. The wedding didn't happen that night. It happened 8 months later, much smaller, at a courthouse with a lunch after, and I was invited to that one too. My sister and Garrett worked through whatever they worked through. His firm settled its inquiry quietly, the way these things settle, with fines and corrective orders, and his name a little tarnished but intact. He cleaned up the parts that needed cleaning. I like to think part of that was the look on his face in that side room, the version of his future he'd glimpsed and didn't want. There was a kind of investigation into my parents, eventually, though not the dramatic kind. Records get audited when you point at them. The college fund became a civil matter, restitution worked out by lawyers, my name cleared off a loan it never belonged on. My mother called it persecution to anyone who'd listen. My father aged about a decade in a year. He asked to meet me once at a Bob Evans off the highway because it was halfway between us. He looked smaller than I remembered, not in his body, in some other way. I told myself your mother handled all that, he said, turning his coffee cup in slow circles. The money? The forms. I told myself I didn't know. Did you? I asked. I didn't ask, he said, which was its own answer, and he knew it. I should have asked. I should have fought for you. It was easier to let her decide, and then it was too late to have an opinion. He started to cry, a 60-year-old man undone at a chain restaurant by something 9 years late. I don't expect you to forgive me. Good, I said, not cruelly, because I haven't decided, but I'm not going to spend the rest of my life angry at you either. Accountability isn't the same thing as hatred. You can have the first one without me handing you the second. My mother has never said she's sorry. She's not going to. Some people would rather drown holding their version of the story than reach for a hand that might pull them into a truer one. I used to think I needed her to break, to finally see it, to say my name like I'd mattered. I don't need that anymore. The wanting just quietly left, the way a fever breaks in the night and you wake up able to breathe. My sister and I talk now, carefully, like two people walking on a frozen pond that mostly holds. She sends me pictures of her kid. She apologized once, fully, for a thing she'd had no power over. And I told her it counted anyway because it did. We're not what we might have been if we'd been raised in a house where love wasn't a budget line. But we're something. There's affection in it, and there's distance in it, and somewhere in between there's a thing that feels almost like peace. People ask me sometimes, when I tell pieces of this, whether the envelope was revenge, whether it felt good, and the honest answer is that revenge was never really the point, and good was never really the feeling. What I wanted was balance. I wanted the truth to stand up in the room and take a seat at the table, where the lie had been sitting comfortably for 9 years. I wanted to stop being the only one in my family carrying what actually happened. They tried to teach me a lesson at that kitchen table when I was 18. They called it independence, and they meant abandonment, and they dressed it up as a gift. I kept the word. I just rewrote what it means. It doesn't mean nobody helped me, though. Nobody did. It doesn't mean I owe no one, because I owe a professor named Quinn and a boss named Lena, and the younger version of myself who did the math on a legal pad and refused to round down. It means I built a life that doesn't rise or fall on anyone's permission. It means when my mother lifts a glass in a tent full of strangers and tries to make me small, the room can laugh if it wants to. And I can stand there in a suit I paid for and know exactly who I am and not need her to agree. For a long time, I thought the worst thing my parents did was take the money, the college fund my grandmother opened, the aid they starved with a signature, the loan they pinned to a name I never wrote. But sitting in that side room watching my father go white, I understood the money was never the real theft. They took my version of the truth and replaced it with theirs, and they made me carry the lie for 9 years like it was mine to hold. What saved me wasn't luck. It was a chain of small, ordinary choices, the kind nobody claps for. When my mother told me to figure it out, I figured it out. Not the way she meant, as a punishment, but the way it became as a habit. I worked the early shift and the closing shift. I took 2 classes at a time when I couldn't afford 3. I sat for one section of the CPA exam, failed, paid again, passed. None of that was dramatic. It was just refusing to round myself down. That stubbornness, that flat unwillingness to quit on a thing I decided was mine, is the whole reason there was a person standing in that suit at all. But grit by itself would have just made me a tired, angry woman. What turned it into a life was learning to think clearly instead of bitterly. Lena used to tell me we don't get angry in this work, we get accurate, because accurate is the only thing they can't appeal. I built my entire career on that. I learned to look directly at the thing everyone else was too polite to see, to follow the money instead of the feelings, to pull the records and let the pages speak. When the envelope finally landed on that table, it didn't need me to scream. The facts did the work because I'd done the work first. And here's the part I'd want anyone hearing this to take seriously. The reason I could put those documents down and walk away clean is that I'd already recused myself from Garrett's case the morning after I saw Brooke's engagement photo. I had every reason to want him to squirm, and I chose the harder, quieter thing. I took my hands off the wheel. That choice is the only thing that let me stand in that room as the honest one. If I'd used my position for revenge, I'd have become exactly the kind of person my mother already believed I was. So I don't tell this story to teach anyone how to win an argument at a wedding. I tell it because the way you survive people who decided your worth in advance is by becoming someone they can't define. Someone who keeps her word when it costs her, who thinks instead of sees, and who simply will not stop. You don't need their permission to be that person. You never did. I just took 9 years to believe it,